Okay, well, just a very quick welcome from me. I'm Matt Howe, Executive Director, Green Mountain Conservation Group, and want to thank you all for your interest and for your support for our work. I think many of you know that we have three exceptional program coordinators here. Tara Schroeder, our education coordinator, is the one who organized this session. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us tonight. I want to thank Moselle Spiller for all her work promoting it. And then I want to thank Jill Emerson, our water quality coordinator, for serving as our moderator this evening. So Jill, I'll let you take it away. And thank you, Russ, for being here.
My pleasure.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us at this program this evening. I want to just go over a couple of housekeeping things before I introduce Russ. I'm sure for many of you, this is not your first time on a Zoom, but just in case, I would like to just go over, we're asking everybody to stay muted during the presentation. For this presentation too, because there are so many of you, we're going to ask that cameras be off just to help with the streaming. Typically when Zooms have a lot of people on them, you can kind of clog the bandwidth with so many video images. And then finally, if you have a question for us during the presentation, if you can use that chat feature that's located at the bottom of your screen and just pop your question right in there, and we'll make sure that we read them to, I'll read them to Russ at the end of the presentation, and we'll get any of your questions answered. So maybe, I guess maybe we'll make an attempt. We'll loft them to Russ and see what happens. So I'm pleased tonight to present Russ Lanoie. From Rural Home Technology. He has over half a century of experience and innovation at solving soil and water related issues for rural homes and businesses. He's run many programs for us at Green Mountain, has been a lovely partner, and we're very pleased to welcome him tonight for a drinking well water presentation. So with that, I'll hand it off to Russ.
Okay, let me start with this and a little explanation. You probably see my name connected to several things in the paper about solar and septic systems as well. A lot of this has to do with the fact that in 1964, I moved with my cousin into a campground in Albany. And a campground is just a compilation of roads, parking areas, septic systems, and wells. So we had to learn a lot early on to be able to be self-sufficient. And I was very fortunate that my cousin's husband was a stationary engineer, formerly a ship's chief engineer. And I learned enough from him that I was able to pass the pump installer's test the first time I took it. At the same time, I took my well installer's test back, I think, in 1984. I thank Frank Gilmartin for that. It was a good experience. He was a merchant marine back during World War II when you didn't call UPS when you needed parts. So let's see if we can, I want to show you this thing. If you haven't seen the video, pay attention to this because it's going to come up. This probably is as much a reason for us being able to be here and talk about this as any single thing that has happened. This, I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm just going to show you how it goes together. This actually came out of the well that you see having been replaced in my front yard 2-3 years ago. And that's been replaced with the deeper well that's in the video. And this is how the water gets out. This is what goes down in to draw the water up. The water turns a corner here and comes out. And this is just so I can get a good handle on this thing. And this slips down into here very easily. If you can see that, it just slips in snugly because it's going to be sometimes holding 200, 300, 400 feet of pipe. So it has to be pretty strong. So now let's see if we can do the screen share thing here. All right. So have you got the screen? Have you got my screen yet?
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Okay. Everybody knows the story of Miracle Worker. My daughter was in that, and we had live water on stage for her. The first word that Helen Keller ever said was at a pump when she said, "Wah wah." So everybody has seen that, I'm sure. Now, Now, why can't I get my full screen here?
So you're in, it looks like you're in the Zoom function, which you may need to go to the PowerPoint feature.
It's not a PowerPoint, it's a PDF.
Okay.
And I had this, I had
Just
it.
go ahead and click your PDF screen right now. If you just click something on there on the PDF, that should register it.
I don't know what the heck. This is altogether
Okay,
different. I don't
now
know.
you can go back to view and it should go to full screen.
Go back to view. There we are, full screen.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Yep. All right. So groundwater is found in the ground, in the cracks and spaces in the soil, sand, and the rocks. It's stored in and moves slowly through geologic formations of soil, sand, and rocks called, as we all know, in Ossipee, aquifers, or aquifers, as some people pronounce it. A water well excavation or structure created in the ground by digging, driving, boring, or drilling to access groundwater. My geology teacher at the University of New Hampshire, in spite of the fact that he was the worst teacher I ever had, he did say that there is water in the ground everywhere. I think he was maybe not too impressed with dowsers because there is water in the ground everywhere. Though I do believe that dowsers can find where there's more of it, which is very helpful if somebody's digging a well. Now, geology and soil types usually determine the most suitable type of well or where it's going to be. However, wells installed on house lots today are often located by the septic system designer to meet the requirements. Okay, so here we have a septic plan for a replacement system. The leach field is up here, and there's supposed to be 75 feet between there and here. That's the well. That's the well, 75 feet between there and here, because the well was out front. So there was plenty of room here. But the septic designer often locates the well, and that's where you're stuck with. You can't do a heck of a lot about it unless you redesign or you have a dowser and you come up with a better location. But normally it's a septic designer who's going to locate that. Now, sand and gravels yield water easily. That's pretty obvious. Water passes through sand like something goes through a tin horn. This was the first tractor, or this is what the first tractor I ever had looked like back in 1969. When I dug a well in the campground that served like 50 families in the campground. It was a dug well. It was only like maybe 9 feet deep, but it was in real permeable soils. That soil yielded water like crazy. I think that well is still in use today. Well, however many years it's been since 1969. Now, heavy soils, we have a lot of in this part of the country, yield water slowly, but they often have a high water table. So it's a double-edged sword, high water, but slow yield of the water through the ground. And this is an important point because people get nervous about pumping their well in a low year. Pumping a well seldom lowers the water table in the area immediately surrounding the well, or it does in the area completely surrounding the well, but not completely over the whole area. It's usually only in the area around the well, and that creates a cone of depression. The more permeable the ground is, the wider that cone of depression is likely to be. The tighter the soil, the narrower that cone of depression is going to be. The same principle is used for dewatering construction sites. And we did the Anglican church here in Conway. We had several dewatering sites to drop the water table so we could actually work in the ground. They're very slow soil, they have a very high water table. Now there are basically three types of wells that we're looking at. The old dug well that goes back to biblical times, a driven point, and which we'll talk about first, and the drilled well, which has become very common in recent years. Lots of well drillers in the state, and there's advantages to each of these, and we'll talk about them. The simplest type of well is the driven point. We put one of these in Tamworth years ago, and I put a pump on it, could pump out 25 gallons of water a minute, and I could not pump that dry. It was such permeable soil that this well point was all it was necessary to provide an adequate water supply to the residents. This is what well points look like. They're driven in generally with either with a sledgehammer or a well point driver. I have a well point driver if somebody needs to borrow one sometime. And they're either screens or fine slits and generally these I've seen, they're usually brass and galvanized, and they don't last too long. The newer ones that are all stainless steel can be pulled out of the ground, cleaned up, and put back in the ground successfully. This is what happens. You can see the little divots on there. It looks like chicken pox. That's where the soil has plugged up those screens and rendered that point, a well point, about useless. Rotary drilling is what you typically see when you hear somebody talk about a drilled well. It's the old days they were pounded. More recently they are drilled. This is what the drill head looked like. This is one of the Tasker boys touching that up with a grinder. This is what goes down into the ground to grind its way down through the rock to make that well. Sometimes they will be able to actually make a more like a well point by poking holes in the casing if they get into water-bearing sand or gravel. That's a gravel pack well. More typically, they're going down into the rock, and their casing goes down into the rock a certain depth to be able to provide a tight seal. And there are even some regulations now about septic systems being a little bit closer to a well if the well is guaranteed to have a tight seal. I'm not sure who guarantees that, but now the submersible pump can fit inside that 6-inch casing. The casing is 6-inch steel generally, and this pump is only like 4 inches, and that will drop down inside of that. So the reason for that is sometimes that pump has to be down 200 or 300 feet. There was one in a local development that was down close to 1,000, I think, and that can't hang on plastic pipe. That has to go on steel pipe. But it all depends on what the recharge rate of the well is and what the static water level is within the well. That gives you, if you can drill a well 1,000 feet deep, if the water's down 900 feet, then you've got to pump it up a long ways. But you can drill 1,000 feet, but the water will come up within 5 feet of the surface. That's a whole different story. You can get that water out much more easily. Submersible pumps, the pump goes down in the well, and the water is brought up not to the top anymore as this used to be. This is how wells were done years ago, and there is somebody here in town that had me check out where his well was years ago. I use a metal detector like the surveyors use, and I could find that slug of iron in the ground at the surface, but this was actually like 5 feet down, because in the old days, the water came out the top of the well and to go to the house. Sometimes the contractor would just backfill this, and you had no idea where your well was unless you had a good metal detector or a good drawing, one or the other or both. Other contractors would actually build a pit above this so that you could access this in order to replace or service the pump, rather than having to try and find it in the middle of winter and then pull it out and have to dig to get at it. So in the old days, this came out over the top, and somebody better intentioned would put this pit on the top of it. But then along came the pitless adapter, which is what I showed you when we started, that allows the water to leave the well down 4, 5, 6 feet, however deep this pitless adapter is installed in the well. You'll see that installation in the video. So this has changed things dramatically for drilled wells, and it's made the 6-pack well that I'll show you a possibility, and providing a way that wells can be installed with a minimum chance of any kind of contamination. This is what the pitless tool looks like. This is what you saw. Water comes up in here, goes out through a hole here to the house, and this is a place for, this is what it looks like. There's an O-ring seal here that seals up against this. This is where a tool goes in. Oops, well, that's coming. And this is where the pitless adapter goes off to the house. The pump hangs off of this, and I'll get to this. If there's no pump in the well, sometimes a foot valve can be installed in the well, either plastic or brass, to be able to pick up the water. If it's not too deep a well, if it's a shallow well, like we'll be talking about, the pump can be installed in the house, but there are many advantages of putting the pump in the well. It never has to be primed. There's no noise in the house. And there's a bunch of advantages. One of the other advantages, if you get a leak in the line someplace, the water will typically come to the surface rather than you start to draw mud into the house if the pump is in the house. Let's hope that doesn't happen. This is the pitless tool. This is what screws in to the top here to be able to lift the part of the pitless adapter out with the pump hanging down below it. Now, sometimes, again, this can be down 300 or 400 or 500 feet. Once in a while, you'll see a well contractor pulling out one of these, and they'll be driving the truck up along the side of the road 200 or 300 feet, pulling that line out. It's a bit of a task, but that's how it works, particularly in a drilled well where there may be considerable depth. This is what your wellhead looks like when you're done. This is a line that brings power into the well that goes over the top here, and then the pitless adapter is down below, sending the water off to the house. This is typically a steel casing. This is a good quality cap. I'll talk more about that later on. Now, this is a funny story. I had somebody call me last year. They bought a house. When they turned the pump on, the water came out of another pump that was not connected to came out of another pipe that was not connected to the house. What the heck is this all about? Well, as I got exploring, I found out that there are 2 pumps, each with its own pitless adapter, and the installer had wired up the wrong pump. How do I get rid of this thing on the side? Are you seeing that on the side? Or are you just seeing the full screen? Anybody?
Seeing what on the side?
Well, okay, I got it. Now I got full screen, so I can see what I've got. I had people's names on the side. So this is an unusual circumstance, and yet I had somebody else I talked with last year who had a problem, and it turned out that she had a leak in the line coming to her house. How the heck did that work out? But there were 2 pumps in that well, so it's not unheard of. It's not common, but it's not unheard of. I think there's a lot of legal implications with that, but that can be done if it's in the deed that you're sharing a well. I mean, there are many wells of all types that are provided the servicing condominiums or that, and one well is providing water to a lot of places. Then it's the association's responsibility. Typically, in this case, it was 2 homeowners that hopefully got along to get these things straightened out. What? Okay, you'll see the word artesian on the side of a truck. If you talk with Dan Tasker, he'll tell you, as he's been on the state water well board, he'll tell you that he's tried to get people to stop using that because artesian means that water comes out of the well under its own pressure. There was a well up in Bartlett years ago. I don't know, it yielded like 160 gallons a minute or some exorbitant amount. Somebody drilled a well not far from it, and it drew a lot of that water away, and the well was not nearly as good. But true artesian means that the water comes up and out over the top under its own pressure. Very unusual, but it can happen. It means that there's probably a mountain somewhere that's pushing the water down, because there's got to be pressure on that column of water to drive it up out of the ground. Here are some of the problems with drilled wells. Last year I had a fellow send me this. You all know who his grandfather was, if I would mention his name. I'll leave him anonymous, but he has a place on a local lake, and he lost his well point, so he had a well drilled. Then he got this notice back from the state when he had the water tested: dangerously contaminated with uranium. High levels of dissolved radon are found in the groundwater in some areas, flowing through granite or granitic sand and gravel formations. If you live in an area with high radon and groundwater, it can get into your private well. Showering is one of the worst things because you're breathing at it as it's coming out of the shower head. Washing dishes and laundering can disturb the water and release radon gas into the air you breathe. How to remove radon from drinking water? I guess the bottom line is with a lot of money. This is basically what I hear: aeration treatment or granular activated charcoal. It's expensive and it requires maintenance. When you get down in, we lost a friend of mine who I've done a lot of work for over the years, who knows all of this subject pretty well because he's an engineer, lost his dug well. And instead of having a well drilled, he had us dig a new well. And we got down to bed, I think we got down to ledge, and I don't think he's going to have a problem anymore. He didn't want a drilled well. So this is what this fella said on the lake. He's thinking going back to a well point, which is what he had. And I know the cottage next to him, or a couple of cottages over, has a well point, because I worked with a local plumber to pull that out of the ground, clean it up, and put it back. So well points are very appropriate in some places, and you're not going to get radon out of a well point. You might get some of the other things out of a well point, like the well, I can't show you now, but you can get the stuff that turns your toilet brown, and manganese, iron, all that kind of stuff. It's always a crapshoot when you're digging in the ground as to what you're actually going to get for water. Let's get to dug wells. They are one of the oldest water supply technologies available, but because they are so shallow, they have a highest risk of being contaminated. Okay, dug wells. Now, this would not be around this part of the world. Our stoned up dug wells, the stones are usually pretty round. This must have been in Pennsylvania or somewhere. But somebody gets down in the well and keeps digging, and somebody hoists the bucket up out of the top. I've worked with folks to lower wells like that. It's not pleasant, but it's important if it's your only source of water. This early wells typically had rocks. Some of them are gorgeous structures. The rocks are laid up very carefully, and because they did not have the concrete well tiles like we have now. These are modern dug wells use a concrete well tile. They're called a tile because the early wells, and there's actually one right on the edge of my property done in 1947, actually has ceramic tile, vitrified clay, not unlike what my daughter makes in her pottery shop, but 2 or 3 feet in diameter, and they're called tile. Like tile drainage is actually pipe, but it's called tile because in the early days it was drain tile. This is what more modern concrete well tiles look like, with a concrete cover, with something to lift on it. You put a bar through there to lift it off. This is a cutaway. I don't remember exactly how this happened, but this is what that looks like. Actually, there's supposed to be steel reinforcing in here to reinforce that tile so it can't do what this one did. It doesn't, they don't all have it, and it doesn't always work, as you'll see in a minute. Coliforms are a group of bacteria found in plant material, water, and soil, also present in the digestive tracts and feces of humans and animals, particularly warm-blooded. Most of the time, the bacteria are not harmful, most of the time. Why test for them? Because E. coli, if it's a water test has positive for E. coli or any one of these indicators, it can mean recent contamination with soil or human feces. Now, this is very typical. This is a typical dug well with a well tile that has a tapered connection here, but this is the top one. Had the installer been a little more alert, he would have used one without this tapered joint at the top, and the cover would have fit on it better. Instead, what we've got is this. I could actually almost stick my fingers in there, and you can see daylight from one side of this cover to the other. And there's this notch out here that's just big enough for little critters, maybe an occasional snake or small frogs to crawl through. Now, there's another issue with this homeowner had coliform in their well, and he hired me to. I had actually lowered this well years ago by digging it deeper, by working inside. Another trick that I won't go into here, but it worked, and they haven't had a problem with water supply since. This is going to creep in through the cracks. Okay, roots. Those roots actually were inside the well that he took out. He happens to be a climber, so he had his climbing hat on down inside the well, and you'll see a picture of this a little bit later. He was actually pulling those roots out then. And what we did, we dug around the outside of the well, and he grouted around the outside of the well so that the roots could not get back in. Now this is one of my favorite. This is an old well house that served a local inn that's privately owned, and if you would look inside, those were the stones. This was the well house. I mean, this is a pretty good size, probably 15 feet across, a big cistern. This is the inside of the well with the rocks blocking up, and this is what you could see at the top. That was big enough for more than just snakes and things. You could get chipmunks and maybe even a thirsty raccoon in through there and into the well, where it would probably expire and become part of your, well, never mind. This was the replacement for that well, which is what we'll talk about in a little bit. This again was this is a dug well that I was called on because there was a problem with the water, and this might have been coliform, but in fact, we got 25 dead chipmunks out of this well. Hope nobody's eating supper. And in various forms of decay. The well digger had used perforated tile all the way to the surface and wrapped it with plastic, but the plastic deteriorated over time. Those holes were plenty big enough for a couple of chipmunks chasing each other to go tearing right through and falling down into the well, and we could actually see the scratch marks where they were trying to get out on the concrete on the side. This is the steel that's supposed to be embedded within the concrete. It's not always. These are the perforations that should have been used at the bottom only to let the water in and not all the way up. Now there's something you may note here in the original diagram I showed you of dug wells. If you notice these well tiles, to me, they are installed backwards. And actually that one I showed you that showed you where the well cover didn't fit very closely. That was installed actually correctly. This should have been here well, let's go down here. This bump here should have come up here so that any water coming down the side would shed away instead of being able to shed through. No, now nobody, I have never worked in a well or seen a well where the casing joints in the top 8 feet were watertight, unless we were tightening them up afterwards to reduce contamination. You will also notice that the surface, that the cover on this well has well, this is unusual to see one that's shaped like this. We'll see something else in a minute here. But that is a place where stuff can get in. A bird poops on top here or whatever, and this can wash down through into the dug well. This is a cover of a dug well. By the way, a round cover is much better than a square cover because a round cover won't fall through the hole. A square cover on a diagonal can fall into the hole and it becomes a bugger to get out, especially if the well's 20 feet deep. But this taper fits down into here, but typical of these things, they never fit very tight. So there's a lot of room for contamination to get into that well. This was a very unusual well. This was at the retreat center in Vermont. And this was a bell and spigot type concrete well tile, but it actually had a cover that was designed to fit down over it. This was the nicest I had ever seen, never seen it before or since, but this was very well designed, well installed. Nothing could, well, stuff, I suppose something could get driven in there somehow, but under normal circumstances, driving rain or whatever would be shed by this, and the cover fit down tightly. So there was no way for stuff to get in. Very unusual, but very effective. I did this once on a well where we had, you know, an ill-fitting cover. So I grouted the side all the way around, and then I used a septic tank plastic cover, and I grouted that to the well. So I had that seal all the way around. I marked it so the snowplow wouldn't hit it. And a couple of years later, they hooked to the community water system anyway. But that is a way to be able to seal up the surface of a well and keep the contamination from getting down into it. Now we get into the reason that that Greg Hill and I dig wells the way we do. Actually, we started with our first dug well back in 1984 up on Foss Mountain, and that was dug with just a small backhoe. There's so much water on that hillside that it's been plenty. This was a replacement well over in Chatham. They didn't like what they were seeing in the well, and they wanted to replace it. So this is my website where I explain all this stuff in septic systems and roads and all the other things I get in trouble with. This is the video that's been, you have the link from Green Mountain, but this is what you would find if you look in print or on the screen on my website. We use a 6-inch plastic casing. We dig as deep as we can get, which is usually about 20 feet, maybe a little bit more if we dig a little bit of a shelf to get the excavator down. And in most of the soils around here, that's deep enough to get into the water table. One well done in 1987, I think there was never less than 7 feet of water in that, and that was dug about 20 feet deep. So it's dug down all the way to the bottom. You know, how deep is a well? Well, all the way to the bottom, just like a road is all the way to the end. Backfilled with 1.5 inch washed graded stone, the same stone that's used in septic systems. It's used for exactly the same purpose, to transfer water from one place to the other. In a septic system, the water goes away. In a well, it provides it'll provide storage for water, and it also provides a linkage to the aquifer around the outside. The larger area you have, the more chance you've got of getting water maybe out of a vein or a spring or something. We can see these as a well is being dug. You'll see areas that will begin to glisten and know that there's water there. Fabric over the top of this, filter fabric, sand over the top, and then the original material over the top, sloped away so that contamination can't run down next to the well. It can't get into this until it gets all the way to the stone, if there is any contamination that does try to get through, because this casing is absolutely watertight. It's watertight, even at the pitless adapter, it's watertight because of the gasketing on the pitless adapter. No water can get through that, in or out. So here's some of the advantages. I worked on a well once that caved in just about the time we were setting the casing. Had there been a worker in the well, we would have stopped there and probably called Charlie in North Conway to come get him. Worker does not have to enter the hole. And I'll tell you, when you're 20 feet doesn't sound like a long ways down, but when you're in that hole looking up, wondering if the ground's going to cave, it's not a good feeling. We had to do that in the old days with well tiles. We had to level the bottom one up so that we could stack the next ones on top and the well would come up straight. So the worker does not have to enter the hole and until the hole is backfilled enough for the level of the pitless adapter. Again, as you see, this is the level of the pitless adapter on this particular well. The one-piece casing reduces the quality of contamination. The 5-gallon bucket on the top is to keep anything from going down in here as we're with the excavator putting the stone over the top of the well and letting it drop down in around the well casing itself. So this is the level of the pitless adapter here. I get a point on that a little later on. So the water service uses a standard pitless adapter that you can get at any plumbing supply house. Very common. They're usually 1 inch, like the one I showed you. This, I believe, is a 1 inch And this is what hooks through the side of the well. It's a little tricky when you're doing it, but it's really very easy actually. Drill a hole in the side of the well, and with the pitless tool, you drop this thing down, as it's all made up, feed it through the side of the well, and then tighten it up, and then you can pull this out and hook the pump on it, or a foot valve or whatever. And all maintenance is done from the surface. Anytime that pump has to be serviced, or a foot valve or anything, it's all done from the surface. Nobody ever has to get into that well. This is the middle of the winter. I've had the Tasker boys ask me to, with my metal detector, to go find a drilled well in a snowbank, because the snow is 3 feet deep over the top of it. Unfortunately, well, no, I say that with an iron cap on the top of a plastic casing, you would still be able to find that in a snowbank. Now, note that the storage that used to be accomplished with the large well tiles, or that thing I showed you with the big, almost a building over the top, a huge cistern, that's now accomplished by a large volume of washed and graded crushed stone. Inch and a half crushed stone is approximately 40% voids, and 1 cubic foot of water equals approximately 7.5 gallons. 40% of 7.5 gallons equals 3 gallons per cubic foot of stone, times 27 cubic feet of stone per yard equals 81 gallons of water per cubic yard. 75 gallons of water storage per yard would be a conservative round number for estimating purposes. 10-wheel dump truck holds about 12 yards of stones. 2 loads are going to give you about 1,800 gallons in storage, assuming that the water table hasn't dropped down below the top of the pipe. You notice that the picture that Green Mountain published of me with my flooding well in front of the house. That well is the one that you see in the video. That's about 20 feet deep, and I get a tremendous amount of water out of that. It services our skating rink in the winter, and it services all of my daughter's agricultural activities for all of her CSAs in the summer. So by using all this stone, you're creating more surface area, which gives you more opportunity to pick up veins of water. So it's kind of a win-win. And the last step in the installation of one of these wells is pumping it. We try to pump it just as soon as we possibly can. So any of that water that's coming in and drawing silt with it, that silt is still in suspension. We're pumping that out, trying to get water clean. And sometimes in an hour or so we get water clean. Sometimes it's overnight, but we'll pump it, and it can't hurt to pump it. It helps to pump it. People who are afraid to pump their well down, I would say admonished that pumping the well is not going to hurt it. It's only going to help it. The more you draw it, the more it's going to open the veins up and let water into the well. Now, if you're in a very tight drought situation, you might not want to do it then. But to help develop the well, pumping it can only be helpful. This was that well I showed you with the owner down into it. An alert local plumber did this within the well to be able to service the well from the surface so that nobody would have to climb down into the well again. There's a pitless adapter on this piece of 6-inch pipe that is screwed to the wall of the well. I thought it was pretty elaborate and pretty clever. What we'll do at other times, had we been doing this all at the same time, we would have run a piece of rigid pipe through the side of the concrete tile and put the pitless adapter on that. We've done that quite often to be able to use the pitless adapter so that you never have to go into the well for servicing it. Because typically in a dug well, the line will just come through the side of the well at 6 feet deep, and then it'll drop down. And the only way you can service that is to get down into the well, which is not always pleasant. A few final things here. When we do a well like this, one thing I've learned is that we want to run the line up like this so that if the ground settles, and it will, because you're probably not getting compaction the way the glacier did. That pipe can actually settle and break. The pump was in the well. In this case, the owner had water coming up to the surface. So we rectified this. Low water cutoff switch is always prudent in a dug well, perhaps even in a drill well. If for some reason the water level does go down to the point where the pump starts sucking air. Air is not good for most pumps. I'd say all pumps, unless it's an air pump. A low water cutoff switch looks like any other well pump switch, but it has a little lever on the side. And what happens, I have this on our well, and I find that every once in a while, if we're drawing too much water, this will shut off. And my daughter knows all she has to do is go back over and flip this switch up and hold it for a few seconds. Once the water level has got back up, and I think it was my fault because I probably didn't put enough holes in the casing for the water to get in there fast enough. I can't believe we're pumping that all the way down. I think we're just drawing water out. It's a 3/4 horsepower pump, only pumping up 10 feet. You saw the stream coming out the end of the hose. It pumps in an enormous amount of water. Just an admonition there. But this isn't, I don't think it costs that much more, but it's a protection for your pump. So if you come home someday and there's no water and the pump doesn't want to run, and you've got one of these, you go to it, turn it up, and wash your pressure gauge. The water will come up, and the pump will stay on by itself. Well caps. This is probably an aluminum cap. I haven't seen one. Usually there's a steel or a cast iron. This is the cheap spread, and I had one of these on our well. And when I had the water tested on the well, I think we had some coliforms in it. And the state recommendation was check your well cap. I did. There were earwigs all underneath the well cap, as well as in the pressure switch. So now have this type of a cap on that is actually gasketed, where no insects, nothing can get into it. So that well, it's linked to the ground where nothing can get into it except for what's in the groundwater. It's always important whenever you work on a well to disinfect the well. My nephew works for the City of Providence Water District, which provides water to half of Rhode Island. And I've asked him about how they chlorinate. He said, we don't know. We just keep dumping chlorine until we can smell it. It's pretty hard to know. It's pretty imprecise art, apparently. But it would be chlorine that you would put into the well. This is a chart that the state has provided to give you an idea of how much water there is. And then you can follow the recommendations on how much. We usually dump a half a gallon in, let it set overnight, and run it through all the plumbing, and then flush it, not into your septic system, but flush it into out into the yard so the chlorine can evaporate. And probably don't put it on your tomatoes, I suppose. The state of New Hampshire has a lot of information if you go on their websites. And if all else fails, and you have a dug well or any well, and you just can't seem to get rid of the contamination, these things sell for about $700. They have a UV light in the middle that has to be changed once a year, apparently. Not terribly expensive. Your plumber can install that. You can install it, and that UV light will kill the bad stuff in the water. It's not going to take out it's not going to take the arsenic and whatever out of a drilled well, but it will take the contamination out of a shallow well. Now, I have found this is the best use for concrete well tiles. Every once in a while, I accumulate a few, and my wife loves them because she doesn't have to bend over to tend a lot of her garden. So that's what I have, and we can switch back and start getting some questions.
Well, thank you, Russ. That was a wonderful presentation, full of a lot of information there.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at the chat, and we'll see if we've got some questions for you. And if you've got questions, feel free to add them into the chat. Let's see here. So one person writes for you, Russ. How recent is this pitless well technology? Would a dug well from 2005 be this type? Oops, I'd have to say it was a drilled well, not a dug well.
Drilled well, if you can see the well head above the ground, the chances are 100 out of 100 that you have a pitless adapter. How else would the water be getting to your house? That makes sense?
Makes sense. Okay, we've got another question that says, every single time I fill my 500-gallon hot tub, I think, oh geez, I wonder if I'm going to make my well run dry. To what extent should I be worried about such a thing?
Well, I've said that several times in the presentation. You're not going to lower the water table. You're going to create a cone of depression around the well, but that cone of depression is going to come back up to the water table after you stop pumping. So, as I said, pumping is one of the best things you can do for the well. It helps to develop it. So I wouldn't worry about the hot tub. Just don't put that in your septic system.
Okay, so we've got another one here that says, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages to where you locate your pump in the well or house?
If you, well, in your house, you put it wherever you can in the house, usually where the water comes in, depending upon what your needs are in the house. In the well, in a dug well, we usually try to go like a foot off the bottom. So if there is any crud that comes in, I don't want to say crud, I should say silt or sand that gets into the well, the pump won't be pumping it up. So it would be the same thing for a foot valve. Keep it off of the bottom enough so that you've got a place for silt and sand to accumulate. In a drilled well, you can have 1,000-foot deep well and have the pump 100 feet down or less if the recharge of the well is great enough and the static level is high enough in the well that you've got enough storage in the well and enough recharge that even at 50 or 100 feet, the well is going to be able to meet your needs. Other wells that get a half a gallon a minute when they're drilled, you probably want it down close to the bottom, so you're using the water that's in that column above the pump as storage, so that you can pump that when you need it. And if any of this doesn't make sense, just come right back at me.
So we got another question here that says, my well is 25 feet from the septic tank due to my incredibly small lot. The well is 300 feet deep. What do you think about this?
Septic tank is supposed to be watertight. And in the experience I've had in over 50 years of working on septic tanks, they become watertight over time because the stuff that's trying to find its way out through the whatever cracks there might be will plug it up pretty well with a biomat. The state has changed its regulations with regard to drilled wells, and the 75 feet from the leach field can now be at a diagonal instead of horizontal. It can be at a diagonal. So if there's 100 feet of casing on the well and the casing is well sealed, you've got over 100 feet of distance from your leach field and maybe your septic tank, if that makes sense. That's a fairly recent thing that the state has allowed because so many of these lots are so small. Not everybody has a 5-acre lot anymore.
Okay, we got a question here that's asking for what's the most important thing, or what are the most important things to test for when doing a water test?
Well, coliforms are one of the big ones, and depends on whether it's a dug well or a drilled well. With a drilled well, you want to be looking for the radon. There's a geologist here in the state who actually patented a well that's very similar to what these wells look like, except that he's extended the bottom of the well out a distance horizontally to provide more storage and more area for water to get into the well. And his reason for doing this is to reduce the amount of arsenic that can be yielded in a drilled well. So you want to be looking for those probably less for coliforms and that sort of thing, and more for radon and heavy metals, because there's heavy metals in our rock. So those are, so with a dug well, you're looking for contaminants usually. With a drill well, you're generally looking for heavy metals.
Yeah, so this person wrote back in and said that it's a dug well with no radon present.
Yeah, no, there shouldn't be.
Okay, so we have a question here that says, what is a good GPM for a well?
5 gallons a minute is usually pretty good. Again, depends. If you've got a very slow soil and you've got 1,000 gallons of water in storage, the chances are pretty slim you're going to pump that well down in a day. But if we hear of 5 gallons of water a minute in the drilled well, people are usually happy with that. The banks are happy. Everybody's pretty happy with that. And it's pretty easy to get that with a dug well also. Now, I will admonish people that there was somebody close by here who wanted to do a dug well, and the contractor dug the well. He said, "Oh, there's no water." And I happened to talk with the homeowner the other day, and he said he was a little upset about that. I asked, how long did they wait to see if the water started to come in? I suspect that they dug it, they looked, they said, "Oh, there's no water," and they filled it back in. Had they left it open overnight, they might have come back and found out 10 or 15 feet of water in that well. It takes a while for it to develop. It takes a while for it to wash in, which is one of the reasons we pump it. Yeah, I forget the nature of the question, but that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
The question was how many gallons per minute for a well.
Yep.
So you did
Yep.
answer that.
Yeah. So it's a function. It's a function of what your water table is, how much you got in storage, and what your needs are. So 5 gallons a minute's not hard to get usually in a dug well.
So we have a question here that says, you mentioned filter fabric on the top of the gravel. Do the fine particles enter from the side?
Yes, but we're trying to keep the sand. We're trying to use a clean sand over the top of the stone, and we don't want that to work down into the stone. So we use a non-woven filter fabric like you'd use under riprap on a road ditch. So yeah, you're going to have this. It's impossible to keep that from happening. And in some ways, it's not a bad thing, because if you're pumping the well and developing it as the stuff is coming in through the sides, you're helping to pump that out and keeping it from settling into the bottom and losing some of your the depth in the well.
Okay, so it looks like we have one final question, unless anybody types in here at the last minute. So if you're percolating on a question, now would be the time to go ahead and type it in. So Russ, this question is how often should you test your water for a dug well?
I can't tell you. I would test it. If you haven't tested it, I would get it tested now and follow the recommendations of the whoever has done the water test, because they may tell you you've got to disinfect the well and test again. And some people have done this 2 or 3 times and never gotten rid of whatever the contamination was, which is why they've ended up putting in one of those UV filters like I showed towards the end. So, I guess, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. Test your water now, so you've got a baseline to know what you're working from. And the testing agency is generally going to give you an idea of what your problems are. Some of them like iron and manganese. Now, manganese smells like dog poop. Our kids used to come up from the skating rink towards the end of the winter, and my wife would say, "You've been rolling in dog stuff?" It was manganese. Manganese has a dog poop smell, and you can get it. You can put in water system. You can put in treatment systems that can get rid of that. I don't think treatment systems for that are probably as nearly as expensive as the treatment systems for radon. I haven't really. The plumber I work with, quite often is very, very well up on this stuff. There are classes every now and then about all the new technologies that are available for water treatment or whatever, and he keeps up on them. So trouble is he's getting old like I am, and he's going to retire. So
if I may add to that, just for the state of New Hampshire recommendations for private well owners, I think it's regardless of whether it's dug or drilled. The recommendation is that at a minimum, you test for a full gamut of parameters every 3 years. You do coliform and E. coli testing yearly, and that you test if there's been any major construction projects on your property or near your property. So that's just a general boilerplate for getting your well water tested.
thank you for catching that for me.
Yeah, no problem.
I anticipated that type of a question. Again, I don't deal with the water quality. I leave that generally to the plumbers. But that does sound like reasonable recommendations. And the state used to be able to pick up the bottles at Extension. I think you still can.
To piggyback off of that, Russ, is Green Mountain does have all of the bottles for the state of New Hampshire testing. We don't make any profit or commission off of it. We simply have the bottles for people to come in to the office, and then they can use whichever ones are what they're curious for doing for parameters, but they can come in and get them for free at GMCG's headquarters in Effingham.
And I'll kind of end this with the story of the farmer that got his water tested, and it came back bad. So he tested it again. It came back bad. He tested it again. And finally his ag agent said, I can't understand what's wrong with what you're doing. And so he said, well, I'll show you what to do. So he walks over and turns the spigot on, wipes it with his hand, and puts a water bottle underneath. That ain't what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to let that water run and clear itself. So, yes, and probably even if you want to disinfect it, maybe disinfect it with an alcohol wipe or something like that. So.
Yeah, the typical recommendation for disinfecting is a bleach solution. But
exactly.
We have, again, the kits in the office, we have the entire set of instructions, including it does cost you. You do have to pay the state to have your water tested. So Green Mountain doesn't make a commission, but it's not free. You have to pay the state. But there's a whole list of instructions on exactly how to test your water, where it needs to go. And there's a couple of commercial entities too in the area that do water testing. So if driving to Concord with your water samples is not your thing, there's a couple of private industries that also do that testing in the Ossipee area.
There's one in North Conway also.
Yeah, so that's Granite State Analytical. They have a drops center in North Conway, and then there's one in Moulton Borough, and I think there's one in Wolfboro, but somebody would need to check that. Don't take my word for it.
Yeah. Now the admonition there is that you don't do the test on a Friday.
Right.
So it'll sit over the weekend. You want to do it. You want to do it early on. So
yes, you definitely need a game plan.
Yep.
So let's see, we just got a couple of people saying thank you. I don't see any other questions, but on behalf of Green Mountain and everybody attending, thank you so much, Russ, for your knowledge and insight on all things drinking water and septic. If you have a 2 a.m. random thought like I frequently do of like, oh, shoot, I should have asked a question. Russ has got his email address up here on the screen, russlanoie@gmail.com, and you can always contact Green Mountain if you lose his contact information, and we can put you in touch. Russ,
and you still have the link up for the video, correct?
On our website, I believe we do, yes.
Yeah, because that takes you right through the construction of one of these 6-pack wells. It's the well in front of my house that we use for flooding for the winter and ag for the summer. So. And that does have manganese in it.
Well, thank you again, Russ. We appreciate your time this evening, and thank you all for attending. We wish you a good evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you.